family commune, and I never do any work. I never washed the dishes. I never cooked the food. I never put a flower in a vase in my whole life. I mean, I was so arrogant. Then I left home and became a hippie, so I lived in hippie communes, and I didn't do the dishes there either, or did the cooking. I could count on two hands the number of meals I've cooked for human beings, I promise, in my 75 years. So then anyway, rented a place about once in my life in my own name, where I maybe bought a few things for the kitchens, but mostly I've just lived in other people's places, you know, my monk and nun karma. So I've never had a place, and I would never buy a vase. I'd never buy, you know, a bunch of flowers. I'd give them to people, but I don't have a vase because I don't have a house. But now I'm sitting here for 3 months in one place. Kind Charmaine in Santa Fe's offered me her nice house, a little adobe house in Santa Fe. So I have vases and I have pot plants. I can't believe myself. I go to the shops and I look for some carnations and I buy all these different flowers. And I arrange flowers in vases. I mean, I'm just astonished. I'm becoming like a housewife. It's amazing. But I try to make them offerings to the Buddha, so it's okay. And I cook breakfast and I wash the dishes and I sweep the floor. I've never done that in my whole life. Anyway, my nice orchids. So here I'm in my Zoom room telling you in my language, hopefully it's not wrong, about what Buddha thinks. And all I'm trying to do being a Buddhist is learn these words, remember them. You've got to remember them. If you forget what a gun is when you're trying to murder somebody, you'll be in trouble. You better remember what a gun is and how to use it. So I'll try to remember these words and then slowly internalize them. You know, you've got to start at the intellectual level, and then eventually the words drip from the head to the heart, and eventually they become experiential, just like any knowledge does. That's what we're trying to do here. And the other thing is this, that I find, I always say this, I quote this a lot, it's so important. Because of these weird ideas we have about spiritual, there's sort of a series of haphazard ideas, and they bring a series of haphazard experiences. We don't think of Buddhism as a coherent presentation of anything. We think of science like that, and of cooking, of music, but we just think religion is kind of this ad hoc, haphazard things. I mean, it's just ignorance. It's bizarre, you know. Why would you want to involve your mind in haphazard, ad hoc ideas? How depressing. So the point is this, whether it's cooking or acupuncture or Buddhism, any body of knowledge, this is a really crucial point, any body of knowledge, a body of knowledge, if it is valid, if it's valid body of knowledge, it has to be coherent intellectually first. Think about that. If you learn acupuncture, in the beginning, it's just, you have no idea. It's just these seemingly haphazard ideas of meridians and this and that and prana and wind energies, whatever they call. And it doesn't, but as you learn it, you begin to join the dots, don't you? The pieces of the puzzle begin to fit together. And I could imagine you could pass an exam in acupuncture that would be perfect. You get 100% marks without even having put a needle in a person's body yet, because it has to be coherent first intellectually. Everything that we call science is like that, but the second we come to religion and spiritual, we become ridiculous. We lose the plot, you know. But that's the Buddhist approach. So it should be very kind of encouraging. But if you leave it at the intellectual level, you're in big trouble. That's why you've got to have meditation. The real meditation is when you've accessed you've accessed your subtle mind, the subtler level of cognition, and you've accomplished single-pointed concentration. And with that laser-like focus, you can then internalize. And it's a very clear process, all laid out in the teachings. You internalize that intellectual information and make it experiential. It becomes your own experience. That's the final point, you know. You can learn theories of acupuncture for 100 years, but until you start doing it, it never becomes real. You can learn the theories about cakes and learn every recipe on the planet, but until you make a cake, that knowledge is intellectual. And that's something interesting about our modern philosophical materialist world. We talk about philosophy, we talk about ideas. And we think of philosophy as like a person who's got a head full of lots of interesting ideas about things. And we think of it as intellectual. We would almost think it's inferior, which is a very typical classical idea about philosophy. We'd almost think you're inferior if you dare to practice that philosophy. A person, this sort of Socratic approach, which is very much our culture. If you listen to all these ideas, you stay very open-minded. You don't, your mind's very open and broad, but there's no discussion of practicing those philosophies. Well, that's like learning how to make a cake, but never making the cake. It's schizophrenic. It's just completely ridiculous. I remember Jeffrey Hopkins, that American Buddhist professor, when I worked with him in the early 80s on one of his books, Meditation on Emptiness, which we published when I was at Wisdom then. And he had started in 1976, he started the Tibetan Buddhist, department in the university in South Carolina, in Virginia. And he told me that when he started, because he's a practitioner, and I think he was one of the first, I think, of Buddhist philosophers who was a practitioner, not just an intellectual. He said he was looked down upon by his fellow philosophers because he actually practiced what he did. If you think of that, that's really very bizarre. But in our culture, that's considered inferior because we don't trust the subjective in our culture. If you practice something, it makes it subjective. Therefore, you can't be objective. That's very bizarre. Buddha's the exact opposite. The whole point of the mind is it's the mind you have to become intimately familiar with. It's the mind that sees reality. It's the mind that causes happiness. It's the mind that causes suffering. So it's got to be totally experiential. And that's unique to the Buddha. That is unique to the Buddha, I tell you. So we need to know these things. So the mind is everything. It's his expertise, Mind is everything. Okay. So yesterday we talked about the delusion, the mind, about the psychological model of the mind and the way the mind, and a little bit about how the mind functions. But crucially, we described the delusions, And in terms of the whole path to Buddhahood, the Lam Rim, this is like high school. This is the middle scope of teachings. This is where we actually become a Buddhist. This is where we seriously become a Buddhist. In the first stages of practice, you're abiding by the laws of karma. And this is what I want to talk about today, This is entry-level genius called grade 1. Buddha gives his description. I mean, in the initial stages, it's very basic instructions. He just exhorts us to at least back off and don't harm sentient beings. So then we should ask why not? And this is a crucial point for the Buddha as well, when he differs from all the other religious views which posit creators. The reason as a Christian to do what God, to not kill, and this is the crucial difference, is because God said so. The reason for the Buddha not to kill is because he says, guess what, Robina? Everything you think and do and say programs your mind and turns you into the person you become. So the reason the broader point about why he exhorts us to do things like not kill, not steal, not lie, they are actions that are called negative at the heaviest level because they harm sentient beings. But the main reason for our benefit at this point, he exhorts us not to do them in the beginning stages is because, as like I said, because that'll harm you. And this is something we miss completely in the West. We think that sounds kind of selfish. We really don't understand if we think that. It's a complete mistake. So the point is here for the Buddha. Jesus says don't kill. I mean, Jesus has got a list of 10 as well. He's similar to the Buddha, don't kill, don't lie, don't jump on the wrong partner, etc., etc. But the reason is radically different. And it's so important to remember this if you want to be a Buddhist. The reason Jesus says not to kill is because God said, because God's the boss. God made you, God made the laws, and God is to be obeyed. And I'm not criticizing. That's the logic behind. That's what a sin is by definition, doing what God said not to do. My Jesuit priest friend told me that. But for the Buddha, different. And we've got to understand this. But just gloss over it. The very first level of practice is based upon the Buddha's understanding of how the mind works. Given that we're driven by delusions right now, which we learn about in high school, given that we're driven by delusions and that the servants of our mind, which is our body and speech, run around doing dumb things because we're not in control. So he doesn't even get us to look at the mind first. That's too advanced. He says, just control the servants of your mind, please, and back off and leave sentient beings alone. So why does he exhort us not to kill, lie, and steal? Why does he not exhort us not to eat too much cake or drink too much alcohol in this first level? For a very simple reason, that the heaviest level, the heaviest actions we can do that are labeled negative, and this one I want to analyze clearly today and look at what we mean here. that the actions that we do that are labeled negative, the heaviest ones, are those that harm others, because others are involved. You know, and any action what a negative action is for the Buddha is an action that's driven by a delusion, that's impelled by attachment or anger, and all the other 83,000, never mind there, but just here, though, the main ones, attachment and anger. Most of what we do now, being samsaric, you know, with our body and speech, is to fulfill my needs. So I'll put cake in the mouth. Why? Because I'm hungry. I'll scratch my knee. Why? Because I'm itchy. You know, we talked yesterday about the 8 worldly dharmas. Why do people kill in the end? It's not because, you know, why do people steal and lie? It's because we're driven to do what I want. It's just, we're all driven by it. But Buddha doesn't get us to talk about that too much. That's what we've got to get to in the high school. He just simply gets us to control our body and speech. Harness your body and speech. Control the servants of your mind. Very intelligent. So he's got a little list of 10 things. The first 7 are about the body and speech. The first 3 are the body. He suggests he exhorts us not to kill. Take the ungiven, as Tibetans call stealing, as Lama Zopa translates it. And don't jump on the wrong partner, or don't rape, you know. In other words, don't misuse your body and speech. The next 4 is speech. Lie, rabbit on about nothing, just boring things, useless. Harsh language, abuse people, or talk bad things behind backs. 7 little things that we really can recognize. And these are the first things he gets us, he exhorts us not to do. And the reason behind it at this level is for our sake. This is something we find hard to hear. We go to the doctor and she says, don't smoke. And you know, first, it's not because she says so. She doesn't say, well, because I say so. Second, she doesn't punish you if you do smoke, which is how we think of sins. You get punished. And third, she doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't smoke because you're hurting other people. She gets us to realize we're hurting ourselves first. We've got to realize that first. You've got to realize the harm you're doing to yourself first. People in the West will call you intelligent if you do good, healthy things. But as soon as you come to spiritual and you come to Buddhism, why don't you kill? Well, because I don't want to be killed in the future. People think you're neurotic and people think you're selfish. No, you're being intelligent. Because the Buddha's fundamental point about karma, the broadest way of talking about karma, this world, this natural law that runs the universe, or if you like, the law within which all living beings run. Karma is a natural law, and this is the powerful point. The Christian teaching, you know, it's God's law that runs things. This is really powerful point, and I'm not criticizing. The Buddha talks about natural law. There's no equivalent in Buddhism. In Buddhism, there are certain Buddha's precepts, like he developed rules when monks lived together, you know. That's his laws. But from the fundamental big picture point of view of the universe and how it works, that's natural law for the Buddha. That's natural law. But this priest friend told me, when it comes to God saying don't kill, the main reason is because he says so. There is natural law involved, he said, like people don't like getting killed. But the main thing behind it is because God said. It's so powerful, that reasoning. And it shows and this is just the difference between the Buddhist one. And I'm not criticizing. We've got to know the difference. We hear it in the same way, which is why we get guilty, which is why we get neurotic. Because we don't analyze the logic behind the Buddha's teachings about karma, which is why Westerners freak out when they hear about it. Can't handle it because we hear it as punishment and reward. Well, there's no such concept in Buddhism because there is no such thing as a punisher. There is no such thing as a rewarder. That's schizophrenic. It's so important. It's a natural law. Just in the same way, like I said to your doctor, it's a joke if you think your doctor's going to punish you with cancer, and that's why she says don't smoke. And that's why, you know, then you go home and you see, oh, my doctor's not here. Oh, well, I'll get out in your Marlboros. Well, I won't get cancer because she doesn't see me. That's how we think now. That we're like children. If we think no one sees us do something naughty, we think we get away with it. Look at our language. That in Buddhism is infantile. There's no such concept. You can't get away with it because it's a natural law. My Catholic mother used to say, virtue has its own rewards. That's exactly what Buddha is saying. If we can get this, then karma is the most brilliant idea. It's the most marvelous philosophy to live according to, you know, because you're the boss. As His Holiness says, karma is like self-creation. We don't need creating by somebody else. I mean, if you're a materialist, you think your mother and father created you. If you're a Christian, you think God created you. Neither for the Buddha. We don't need making by someone else. This is the wackiest idea for the Buddha, I tell you. I'm not being rude. Well, I am being rude, but I'm not meaning to be rude. We bring ourselves, all we've got to do, for the understanding of the view of karma, it's not complicated. All we've got to do is posit the possibility that our consciousness, one, is not physical. Two, it's not the handiwork of mummy and daddy or a creator. Three, can't come from nothing. The only other option is it comes from previous moments of itself. It's not too hard to, we're very intelligent. It's not too hard to hypothesize that. It's just that we don't like it because we're so addicted to our present views. So the Buddha's views, you've got a brain. Yep, you've got a brain, baby, but your consciousness ain't your brain. I always talked recently when I worked on Lama Zopa's book about death. It's out, the new version of it is out now. It's called How to Face Death Without Fear. I hope it's in Australia by now. I hope it's in the bookstore. Oh, you don't have a bookstore anymore, do you? Because no one comes to the centre. Are people coming back to the centre now? Rain, or is it
still slowly? We're working on it. Yep.
Okay. Well, I really hope you got this new one. How to Face Death Without Fear. It's from it was put out a few years ago. It's called How to Enjoy Death, and it was really a mess. It's like a hard book. It look a bit like a Bible. It's a lovely looking book.
It was pretty, yeah.
What?
It was the red and gold one. Is that right?
That's right. This is the better version of it. This is the
Okay.
correct version. This one, How to Face Death, and it's a paperback now. So I think you hope you can get it digital, but it's so helpful. But when I worked on that book, I read this book by, I always quote this. I read this book by an American journalist, a medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and he's a very funny fellow, and he's very wonderful, good journalist. And the whole thing is called The Undead, and it's not about zombies. It's all his experience, his findings of all the complications and problems and contradictions now, certainly in the American medical industry in the different states, about exactly what death is, because of the whole business of farming, they don't call it farming organs. It's a much more polite term. People giving their organs away to other people, which is amazing. But there's big contradictions coming now because for example, in the world, he reported this, in the world, we know over the history in all cultures, there's always been reports of people, quote unquote, coming back to life. I heard that in Victorian times in the UK, they used to put bells in the coffin so that if they came back to life, they could politely ring their bells and get me out of here. I mean, can you imagine the torture? That's why you don't get buried. That's why you wait at least 3 days for the Tibetan Buddhist approach from the Vajrayana point of view, because it takes 3 days for your subtle consciousness to leave the body. So in this book, I mean, for example, so there's a problem. When is death? People getting very confused. And also he's quite cynical about the industry. So they're quite elitist and quite arrogant, and they're manipulating people. I mean, even in Europe now, in many countries, the law is that you give your organs unless you say otherwise. They're forcing people to change. It's really quite heavy, in my opinion. Anyway, he had a whole chapter, for example, and he himself has no view about these things. He says he's an atheist, but he's a very funny journalist. But he had a whole chapter on people reporting what they call out-of-body experiences while they're on the operating table. Well, when you're on the operating table, that's when your subtle consciousness is functioning. It's like when you've gone to sleep. The way they talk about the death process in the Vajrayana, you've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and very subtle consciousness. And you go through this deconstruction process, which is what's called death. And after the fourth of these 8 stages, that's when you stop breathing. And that for the West is when you're dead. But from the Buddha's view, only your gross consciousness has ceased, only your gross body, the senses have ceased. But your subtle mind is now functioning. And that's exactly the same as when you go to sleep. When you're asleep, the gross consciousness has ceased. Obviously not as radically as when you die, because you're still breathing. But, if someone taps you, or if they open up your eyelid, your senses have absorbed, so they're not functioning. Well, that's exactly the same as a death. It's the same process, just more radical. So when you stop breathing, it could be 2 more days before your subtle mind leaves the body. And there are ways of checking this very easily. So, he reported all these people are having these experiences while they have on the operating table. Of course, in the medical industry, they're completely cynical about this and say, don't be ridiculous, it's not possible. But he quoted one particular woman. He said she had to have such a radical procedure that she was virtually, from their point of view, had to practically be made dead. So from her point of view, there's no way she could be conscious. But she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience, and no one can explain it. So technically you don't leave your body. The people report the experiences, and people who have trauma as well, they're floating above their body. Their mind doesn't leave their body. When it does leave your body, that's when you are dead. But the experience of your subtle mind, because it's not the same as your sensory mind, is like as if you're above your body. You can see what's going on. People have astral traveling. People can do that kind of thing. That's your subtle mind. That fits perfectly with the Buddhist view. Anyway, so all these people who are in the operating table, seeing what's going on, and interestingly, their ear consciousness has ceased, but they can hear things as well. And that's a very interesting point. I'll come back to the story in a minute, but I remember when a friend of mine one time in Sydney was in hospital way up on the north, up on the, what's that hospital way up there on the water side above the,
Mona Vale?
Yeah, Mona Vale, exactly. And I was living in the centre, 50 kilometres south, you know, back in the centre in Ashfield. So my friend was in the ICU. So I figured I'd go at night because you can drive quickly at night, and you go through Fenchurch Forest, you can go about 100 kilometres an hour. Otherwise, it takes you about 2 hours to get there on the other side of town, if anybody knows Sydney. So anyway, I'd go at night and I'd stay about an hour with her. She was completely unconscious. They didn't think she'd get back and come back to life, deeply in a coma. And, as far as they're concerned, completely unconscious, can't hear anything. Well, I'd sit there and just do a few prayers. Well, she knew Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche. He used to stay in her house, and she knew Sakya Trinzen, very close to their family. So I'd asked both of their students to please get the lamas to pray for Judy. So every now and again, I'd say these prayers in Judy's ear. It was funny when I first went there, and her husband, he rang up the hospital and said, "Can I please come at night to see her? But I'm a Buddhist nun and I'm her pastor." So when I got there, they were a bit nervous. They said, "Oh, please don't ring any bells." So I promised I wouldn't ring any bells. Anyway, I got there and I had to sit for about 1 hour standing there whispering in her ear. So every now and again, I'd whisper into her ear. I'd say, "Judy, Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen's praying for you." Anyway, she came out of her coma weeks later. And I went to see her and she was all perky and happy. But she said the only thing she remembered from that coma was, she said, it was this husky voice. She didn't know it was me. She thought I was a blue lady coming through the window, saying exactly those words: "Judy, Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you," etc. So, I mean, she's unconscious, right? And so many people report experiences like this. So if you're a Christian, you say that's your soul. No, it's called your subtle consciousness. And even though your ears aren't working, your mind has the capability of seeing and hearing. That's what people who do astral traveling. I remember one time, hilarious, in Dharamsala 25 years ago, at one of the courses, this fellow, a Brazilian-Australian guy, who every night he went to sleep, he'd fly around the world visiting people. He was addicted to it. He thought he was a special spiritual practitioner. He'd come to the classes in the morning exhausted. He'd go to Africa. He'd go to his girlfriend's room in Melbourne. That's his subtle mind. Obviously, he'd done meditation in a past life, but he was so bored by the ordinary teachings about learning to work on your attachment and your anger, he just thought he was like, some special being. But that's your subtle mind. Your mind is, and when you really got the single point of concentration, and Lama Yeshe talks about this in Mahamudra, his book, when you get single point of concentration, you grow this capacity to be clairvoyant, to see the past, to see the future. Exactly. Crystal clear. It's the capability of our mind at a subtler level, according to the Buddhist view of the mind. So this view is radically not the same as the materialist view. That's why if you want to understand Buddhism, you can't squeeze the brain, you can't squeeze neuroscience into Buddhism. To some degree, neuroscience is now proving what Buddha says. And if you're more encouraged by that, well, all power to you. But you can only go so far, because your subtle mind does not need a brain, baby. Anyway, interestingly, back to the man, the doctor, the medical journalist, he quoted one doctor in the book saying, "I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of your brain. I don't know what it is, but at least I can say that." So I think it's fantastic all these things are coming out now. People are looking, and because of these amazing talks that Dalai Lama is giving the last 30, 40 years, organized by this American organization, Mind and Life. You see their website, mindandlife.org. all been published. Brilliant findings now, amazing things from materialists now respecting these incredible views coming from the Dalai Lama, coming from India, coming from Buddhism, which we knew nothing about in our culture, So it's really fantastic that all this is being discussed now. The nature of consciousness, in other words, So it's not such a weird thing to posit your consciousness as not being your brain, and to posit the possibility that your consciousness is not the handiwork. And this is a major point, that it's not the handiwork of someone else. I mean, that's the point. You know, if you're a Christian, God gives you a soul. If you're a materialist, mummy and daddy give you anger, give you psychosis, give you love and compassion. That's a nutty idea for the Buddha. They can be similar to you. My mother was a classical musician. And when she saw her little Bobsy when I was small, she could tell I had potential. So she taught me singing. So we would say in the West, Robina's good at singing because her mother gave it to her. It's in the genes. No. My mother's good at music because she brought it with her from being good at it before. And I'm good at music because I brought it back with me from a past life. So that's, and then we come together conveniently as mother and daughter. So it's not too difficult to explain, you know. It's just very fascinating. So anyway, the mind goes back and back and back. And the law that runs our mind, it's called the law of cause and effect. We love cause and effect. We are geniuses at cause and effect in our culture. That's what we mean by science. Well, Buddha's expertise isn't how to make lamps and toilets and mugs. His expertise is how to get happy and stop suffering. That's what karma is all about, finally. So the fundamental point of karma is this, that every millisecond of what any mind in a mind possessor, ants, dogs, monkeys, Hitlers, Mother Teresas, and other beings as well that aren't human and aren't animal, many of them. Every millisecond of whatever goes on in our mind, and then on the basis of which what we do with our body and speech, is this process of creating actions. Every millisecond we think and do and say leaves seeds or imprints or tendencies in our mind, just naturally. It's just the way it is. Buddha's observed this. And every one of, so the seeds is a good analogy. Every millisecond when I think and do and say so seeds. And unless I do something conscious about those seeds, meaning pull them out, they will ripen as what? My experiences further down the track. That's it. This is not a complicated concept. We understand it perfectly when it comes to being a cook or a musician. You know, every millisecond of what you think in relation to music is what produces the musician you become. I mean, we never say it like that. That's the law of karma. When it comes to emotional things, we have another set of laws. When it comes to the head, we understand that. You have to have the right thoughts to get the cake. You can't just say, I want 17 spoons of sugar and think you'll get a cake. You've got to have the correct thoughts first. Then you'll get the cake. So we get it. We understand you produce the cook, you produce the musician, you produce the murderer. Well, we think someone else produces us and we're an innocent victim and it's not fair and it's all done to me and happiness and suffering comes from out there and I'm just this kind of big lump of nothing. I mean, we are very wacky how we think about happiness and suffering. Buddha says the same law that applies to turning yourself into a musician is the law that applies to turning you into a horrible person or a nice person. In other words, we're responsible. This is very hard for us because we think everybody else is responsible. We love to be victims. This is the irony of ego. We just think we're made by someone else. And then we carry that philosophy forward and we think that my happiness and suffering comes from everybody since mummy and daddy made me. It's all the events out in the outside world. But they're the main cause of who I am. Demented idea for the Buddha, just not logical. So of course, because we are addicted to this view, it's hard to change it. It's hard to change it. So Buddha says we produce ourselves. We come into this life at the first second of conception, fully programmed with who we're going to become. It's all there, right there. You know. So that's why we have to know our mind. Because if what I become is dependent on what I do with my mind, I'd better learn to know my mind, baby. This is my first main job. But first I control its servants, my body and speech, because the mind's so demented and so driven by craziness that I need to first control its servants. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't jump on the wrong partner. Don't just follow mindlessly attachment and anger. It's very common, it's very practical advice. And who is the beneficiary? Me. It's for your sake. That's why we hear it so wrong. We hear it as guilt and we put ourselves down. That's demented. We've got to have, this is like self-respect. The logic behind not killing and not stealing and not lying is because I don't want the future suffering. So of course you have to do, again, posit that possibility that my consciousness will continue. And that whatever I think and do and say programs this consciousness. The words aren't complicated. It's just that we have so many misconceptions about it and we don't like it, because we hear it as blame. So if it is true, every millisecond of what I think and do and say produces who I become. And if I look around and I see people, who say kill and lie and steal, or get killed and get lied to and get stolen from, I think, do I want that? Then it's obvious I don't want that. And we're not talking anything about future other realms of existence yet. Don't even worry about that one. Just look at that one. Look at the world and see people who do demented things and see people who have demented things done to them. Do you want either of those? Do you want to turn into some horrible person who kills and lies and steals? No, thank you. Do you want to turn into a person who gets lied to, stolen from, or killed? No, thank you. Well, then Buddha says, well, honey child, if that's the case, stop creating the causes for that, because you turn yourself into that person. They are the product of their own past actions. Do you see people who are kind and loving and intelligent and funny? You see people who are rich and happy and beautiful, with people adoring them, speaking simple. Do you prefer this? Yes, please. Well, honey, you'd better sow the seeds. You create the cause, because they produce themselves. It's a really empowering idea to think you produce yourself. I don't know why we dislike it. I think it's an extraordinary idea. It's a marvelous idea to think that we create ourselves. I love it. But you've got to be bossy like me to like it. Fantastic. I think it's a great idea. So anyway, if it's true that whatever I think and do and say produces who I become, and if I know I don't want to be miserable and angry and depressed and jealous and full of fear and depression and anxiety and have bad things happen to me, forget future, forget other realms. Good enough. Junior school instructions are the ones you have to follow. Nothing more complicated. Then don't create the causes for that. You don't want to get killed and get sick, don't kill. If you don't want to be lied to and stolen from, don't lie and don't steal. If you don't want to be not believed when you speak, then don't lie. It's really clear. Of course, you've got to hypothesize this because you're not clairvoyant yet. This is Buddhist theory. It's for your sake. So it should encourage us with enthusiasm to want to live this way, because it's for my sake. But we're so addicted to doing it because someone else said, and because we don't want to be seen as a naughty girl. We want to be rewarded. Like I talked yesterday, want to have a good reputation. What mostly motivates us to be a nice person is because we don't want to be disliked. We want to be seen as a nice mummy's helper. So we're kind of ridiculous. It's got to be for our own sake. Just like when you eat well, you are the recipient of the benefit of that. You should be encouraged by that. That's the point about karma. It should encourage us, not make us feel guilty. Okay, when you hear the Tibetans talk, they're really fundamentalist how they talk. I agree with you. Well, I think that. I mean, they're like 10th century. They're really fundamentalist. But if you get past that fundamentalist language, and hear the meaning behind it, it's very encouraging, very uplifting, very empowering. So the next level of detail, if everything you think and do and say produces who you become, and this is one simple way of putting it is, if we look into our lives, look into the lives of other people, you can divide all the experiences into either happy experiences or unhappy experiences. We mentioned this yesterday in terms of pleasant feelings and unpleasant feelings. Unpleasant feelings is a word for suffering, and pleasant feelings is a word for happiness. So we know we want happiness. We know that at the simplest level, we're talking ordinary level here, not even fancy levels of happiness, like realizing emptiness and like Buddhahood. Forget simple levels of happiness. This is what's mainly dealt with in junior school level. It's evident we want happy feelings, happy experiences. And if you look in the ordinary world, what that means is you want pleasant tendencies, you want nice thoughts you want to be compassionate, you want to be wise, you want to be comfortable, you don't want to be depressed, you don't want to be angry, you don't want to be jealous, you don't want to be paranoid. That's very clear. Second, you look at the way people are treated by each other. You want to be seen as a nice person. You want to have lots of money in the bank, and not because you're greedy, so you can practice your spiritual path and be generous to others. You want lovely food. You want nice houses. Ordinary level, and there are causes for this. They're not gifts from somebody. We either think it's the universe doing it, or if we're a bit hippie, or we think it's God if you're Christian, or we think it's good luck if you're a materialist. That's superstition. Buddha's not any of those. It's the fruit of your past work. So if you're like, that's why the garden analogy is a lovely one, you know, seeds and fruits. You know that what's in your garden, because it's your garden, you know you're responsible. So if there are weeds there, you know it's because you haven't pulled them out, and indeed you planted them. And if there are flowers and veggies and herbs, you know that you put them there. This is a very powerful analogy to use in relation to karma. Whereas right now, if we think it's just good luck, well, I didn't ask to get born, did I? You know, it's not my fault. And I just born to these nice parents who have money in the bank and lots of veggies in the garden. Aren't I lucky, we will say. Well, with that view, there's this incredible hubris. You know, oh, look, aren't I lucky? All these lovely vegetables, but you don't realize you planted them. So then you've got to eat them greedily until they run out and wonder why you run out, because you didn't think to grow more. Whereas if you know they're your veggies, you would never forget the hard work that you did to make those veggies get there. You'll never forget that. Every dollar in your bank, you'll never forget that you worked hard to put it there. So you will appreciate it and you'll take responsibility for it. You will own it as the fruit of your hard work. That's the approach to karma. So it's so dynamic, but we don't remember, even with a good little Buddhist, we don't think of karma most of the time. Only until the bad things happen, then we freak out. So the next level of detail is therefore in relation to happiness and suffering. That's it. It's very simple. That whatever actions we do with our body and speech and mind, and the word karma means action, will produce either happiness or suffering. That's it. There's a third category called neutral. Forget them. It's very profound. Everything you think and do and say, well, I produce happiness or suffering. Wow. Well, I better learn to know which seeds will bring which fruit, hadn't I? It's so logical. This is what we have to think with karma, not just do it out of guilt because mummy said you should, because you get judged and rewarded, because you're a good girl, because someone said, or just because it's the right thing to do. All of that's too wishy-washy. You've got to be logical. So with this view of karma, you have incredible self-respect, incredible kind of self-worth. You take responsibility. And this is what's the basis of agreeing with the Buddha when he exhorts us to not kill, lie, and steal, because you don't want the future suffering. So what is the future suffering? Well, there are 4 ways that karma ripens. 4. One way of presenting karma. It's very simple, this one. One is the type of rebirth you get. So in our world now, we're human. Well, for the Buddha, it's like we won the lottery. It's not the lottery really, because it's the result of hard work, but it's so rare. And that's why is it rare? Well, look at how many humans there are, 7 billion. You've probably got 7 billion mozzies in your backyard in one summer night. So clearly, if we're all sentient beings, it's obviously easier to turn into a mozzie in Sydney than to turn into a human on the planet. So the logical deduction is it must be harder to get a human body. And yes, it is. It's incredible, apparently. It's the fruit of unbelievable hard work. If we realize how much morality and virtue, in particular non-killing, generally non-harming, but specifically non-killing, that we must have done just for our mind a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's human womb, that our mind, before we passed away, at the time we stopped breathing, before then, one of the trillions of karmic seeds in our different bank vaults, and there are 4 bank vaults, or 8 really, I'll explain. One for the virtuous karmic seed of non-killing, practice, no doubt, as Lama Zopa says, in the context of living in vows of morality, and I'll explain this. One of those seeds was triggered before we stopped breathing, which at that moment already programmed us to go to our present mother's human womb a few weeks later. They mightn't even have met yet, but the karma takes care, already that's programmed. And like a miracle. And that was a karmic seed of non-killing planted in our mind on the basis of living in the vows of not killing. That gives it, Lama Zopa says, just being good is not enough. We need to practice our ethics in the context of living in vows of ethics. And this is the first level of practice for Buddha. And we'll discuss that. It gives enormous power to everything we do that's virtuous. So the first way in which our karma has ripened in this present life of ours is we got a human body. It's the fruit of incredible virtue. Second, in this human body, there is a mind. And so the tendencies in that mind, the personality traits, the characteristics, your love, your hate, your generosity, your psychosis, your wish to jump on little girls all day, your wish to torture, your being good at music, your being good at footy, all your tendencies. And what are they? This is the second way your karma ripens. The first one's called the fully ripened result. In this case, a human body. Second, in the mind, in that human body, your particular mind, all your different tendencies. And essentially, these are called the actions or intentions similar to the cause. They're a bunch of habits, basically. It's really simple, you know. They're a bunch of habits. Just a bunch of habits. We come programmed with our habits. That's the second way karma ripens. The third one is called experiences similar to the cause. Now look at this. Look at our lives since we're born up to now. We live our lives in relation to others, don't we? We're very social beings. And since we're born up to now, we can divide all of our experiences in relation to others in three categories. Those that are nice, people who are kind to us, those that are mean to us, and those who do neither. That's called friends, enemies, and strangers. Well, forget the strangers, okay? So the other two categories, that's one's life. You have lovely things happen. People see you, are nice to you, don't lie to you, they don't steal from you, they give you things. That's called happy experiences, and they are the fruit of actions like that to those people. Karma's pretty personal. Then you got the unhappy ones. The people who are mean to you, rape you, lie to you, steal from you, kill you, harm you, don't believe your words. The terrible things that happen to us. Look at the world. These are the result of doing actions like that. And again, karma is pretty personal. This is the part that is so terrifying for us. It's fascinating why it is. You can't get over this, you know. These are called experiences similar to the cause. Every millisecond since we're conceived up to now of how we're seen and treated by others is an experience similar to the cause. Now, the fourth one is called environmental karma, and it's the very way the physical world impacts upon us. So if you look at your life, these four things: your own type of body, your tendencies, how you're seen and treated by others, and the way the world and the physical world, how it impacts upon you. That's it. There's nothing else. Every millisecond of every one of these, the main cause is your actions in the past. It's not a complicated theory. It's just that, you know, we're not used to it. Every sentient being, for every sentient being, it's the same, you know. So it's obvious you can have a good result of, like, say, a human birth, but you can have really lousy tendencies. I mean, you know, use the extreme examples of the Mr. Hitlers of the world, the wackos, you know. Strong, demented, negative tendencies to kill and or whatever, what we can observe what he did. Or you can have someone like Mother Teresa, you know, the other extreme, kind of the other extreme, a holy person, you know, and somewhere in between. We've got a bunch of both, haven't we? So the next one, experience is similar to cause. You can have it. You can have a tendency to lie, which ripens as you just lying all the time. But you can have the karma from another bank vault of not lying, such that now you have the experience of people believing you. I think Mr. Trump is a good example of this. Everybody says, I mean, even one of the newspapers, I think the Washington Post has tracked every lie he's told since he's been president, and it's in the thousands already. Things they can prove, you know, like things that can prove a lie. I mean, it might be not true, but it's a good example. So clearly the man lies, but but look at the number of people who absolutely adore him and believe every word he says. Now, so he's got the tendency to lie, but he also has, due to past karma from other lifetimes, the tendency to tell the truth. And from his past truth-telling, even now, because he lies, he is believed. That's the karma of telling the truth. Now, you could be having the tendency to never lie, but you don't get believed. I remember some of my friends in prison with their crazy experiences. And there's a friend of mine, Sunny, who's well known in the world. She was on death row for many years, her and her husband, for supposedly killing 2 policemen. And they were completely, totally innocent. They're these hippies, you know. But they didn't get believed by anybody. The police, the judge, the prosecutors, the jury, nobody believed a word they said. That's because of past lying, even though they're telling the truth now. Finally, she got out of prison. She was believed, So this is where we suffer so badly, I think, in our lives in relation to how we're seen by others. And we naturally always equate the unfairness of the bad things that happen to us because we think we don't deserve it. And in a conventional sense, you are absolutely correct. This is why it's so terrifying for us in the materialist world, with the materialist philosophy, because we really do believe that I began in my mother's womb. And if it is true that you did, and if Buddha is wrong, then you are correct to say it is not fair, I do not deserve it. And if we look into why we suffer on this planet, it's because we believe we didn't ask to get born. We believe I began in my mother's womb. We know that those, that man who raped me, I've never met him in my whole life before. So it's obvious and logical to deduce that I don't deserve it, which is what ego thinks. So, but it's true. You are correct if that's true. So if Buddha's wrong, then you are correct. But the Buddha doesn't have that view. And that's why you speak to any Tibetan worth their salt who's got the view of karma. They don't have the concept of I don't deserve. They don't have the thought that says, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. And that's the thoughts that make us suffer so badly. That's why we suffer and go mad. Because of our philosophical view that I didn't ask to get born, my mother made me, and I've never met this person before. So of course we go crazy. But what's fascinating, then when you win the lottery, and you get $1 million, you never think, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this $1 million. I didn't do anything to deserve it. You didn't, but you don't care. Give me more, please. And what this is pointing to, actually, interestingly, is the hubris of attachment that runs our minds. The arrogance of attachment is this junkie in us that just assumes I deserve only the good things. It's so heavy. I use hubris in a really gentle way. It's arrogant beyond belief, No wonder we suffer. We believe without any logic whatsoever that I deserve happiness and don't deserve suffering. It's very, very fascinating to unpack all this. I want happiness. That's different. Yes. I do not want suffering. Yes. But we call it deserve. There's no logic. There's no logic whatsoever. So that's why when we hear karma, we then go, oh, you mean I deserve bad things? And we want to kill ourselves again because we have this heavy duty dualistic view of guilt and punishment and reward. That's the view of ego. Don't blame your Christian mother. Don't blame your Jewish mummy. These are the views of ego grasping. So we've got to unpack our minds. That's why, like I always quote that example. Years ago when I was living in New York running the prison project, I have to have a drink of water. Excuse me, people. I was running the prison project, 2003, and Richard Gere invited a bunch of former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison, to come to New York and meet His Holiness. 20 of them. And some people like me were invited because we work with people in prison. It was a wonderful day. All these whole cross-section of Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, Mexican, male, female. And some of my friends who'd been in prison were there. It was a lovely day. We met His Holiness, so they all had a wonderful time talking about their suffering and everything. But also Richard Gere also invited two young Tibetan nuns who'd been imprisoned in Lhasa and tortured and sexually abused for a couple of years or something. And they were talking about their experiences. And this is a really good example. Tibetans, Buddhism has been there since 700, okay? And 99% of the country was Buddhist. I mean, I always joke and I say that the Jesuits went there in the Middle Ages and they even translated the Bible into Tibetan. They couldn't get one Tibetan. They gave up. I think there's a couple of Muslims, that's about all. 99% Buddhist. So it's been in their, it's in their culture. And if due to rebirth, you've got this view, you get reborn again as a Tibetan. It's just in your blood, it's in your bones. And in the same way that for us in our modern philosophical materialist world, it's an absolute truth that your mind is the brain, you didn't ask to get born, you're a product of your mother, you track yourself back to mummy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, monkeys. That's just the view we believe is the truth without any discussion whatsoever. It's an absolute truth for us in the Western world, materialists. Not just Western people, the materialist view. So for them, it's the same with karma. It's just something ingrained in them. It's just something natural. It's their view of the universe. They don't learn it. I mean, it's just there, and they brought it with them from being Buddhists in the past, no doubt. So it's just a given that they have the view of karma. And that's why His Holiness said that it's making him so sad, this was years ago, that more and more Tibetans are now getting angry. And this is a really meaningful point, and I'll describe it exactly here. So what runs us in the mind, right, is these delusions. Attachment and aversion are the two main ones. And these are the main voices of ego grasping. So that on the basis of that, those running the show, and then we have the view of karma, which is a completely different view for us. So when we hear it wrongly, we're hearing it from the point of view of attachment and aversion. So attachment, like I said, is this arrogance, deeply instinctive sense of entitlement. Attachment is entitlement. I deserve only the good things. I mean, the fundamental one is I want the good things. And then when we make it, I deserve. This hubris happens. So as long as the good things happen, we feel, aren't I lucky? You know? And then a second, the bad thing happens. There's outrage, and that's when anger begins. And what that's saying is, I don't deserve. That's why we suffer so terribly when bad things happen to us. Because of our philosophy. We don't analyze it like this. We don't go deep. We just assume it's that I'm suffering because I'm in prison and I'm wrongly accused. I'm suffering because my husband is mean to me. We don't analyze it. That's what Buddha's demanding we do, because he says our mind is full of these layers of misconceptions. We've got to go into this more subtly, you know, unpack and unravel these assumptions. So these young Tibetan nuns, it was very evident to all the 20 Americans that they weren't angry. Now, we don't trust this in our culture. We think they're suppressing, you know. No. So that's why I'm saying before, what is the philosophy of anger? Listen to it. How dare that happen to me? I don't deserve it. That's what it's saying. And we believe it 1,000,000%. And I'm not being critical to any of us. This is why we suffer. But these young nuns didn't have that thought. It didn't arise in their mind. Why is this happening to me? Because they have an answer. I'm not telling you to believe karma, but that's their view. They didn't have anger. It's incredible. And that's why then they said, at the end, one of them said, and this is the point, not only for their own sake, but even this is the basis of the view of compassion. And then they said, and of course, one of them said, and of course, we have compassion for our torturers, because we knew we must have harmed them in the past, and because we know they will suffer in the future. So that's the view of karma, and that's the basis of compassion. But you cannot have that view of compassion until you have that view for yourself. And that's the junior school and high school level. The practices are incremental, they're gradual, you know. So we've got to unpack, this is philosophy. This is Buddha's philosophy. Philosophy is not some abstract bunch of boring ideas. It's the structure of how you think. It's the way you think, which informs the way you live your life. And that's also why another friend of mine, Jidrol, I always quote this story, 30 years ago, he came out, he ran away from Tibet, and he told me about how in 1987, when it was the first mini uprising against the Chinese communists, you know, since 59, it was all the young monks and nuns who were the radicals demonstrating. So we think of demonstration, we think of anger, shouting, and you saw the Tibetans, you would have seen them shouting and yelling. So he's telling me about how he first got arrested, and then he was released, and he got arrested again, he got tortured, and then he got harmed. Then he thought he'd better escape. So he left and came to Nepal. And since he left, his father got murdered, brother got murdered, and he was sad, you know. And I said to him very casually, I said, Dictor, do you ever get angry? And he laughed casually. Angry, Robina, what for? It's our own fault. Now, those words are so shocking for us in the West. He said it so casually. He just meant it in a casual way. He meant, what are you talking about, anger, Robina? If I created the course all my life, and I created the course from harming other sentient beings, and I get harmed now, why would I be angry? Because anger says, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. So anger is an absurd nonsense. Anger is ridiculous. Anger is a load of rubbish. Anger is a meaningless philosophy. Anger is the voice of ego. Anger is thwarted attachment, the hubris of I deserve only the good things. I know it sounds heavy like this, but we've got to have courage to analyze our minds, you know, unpack and unravel these misconceptions. That's what Buddha's saying. They're wrong philosophies. Don't believe them. Check it out. All this relates to karma. The mind and karma are intimately connected because the mind creates karma. But first we just control the body and speech. No discussion about the mind yet. It's only when we get to high school we start to unpack and unravel, like we talked yesterday, and like we're implying today, the mind, what informs our actions. And we become really in charge of this process, you know. That's the point. So everything we think and do and say produces the person I become. Do I want to be happy and have nice things happen? Yep. Okay, create the cause, baby, and stop doing things that will cause the opposite. He's not even asking us to be nice yet. He just says, don't be mean. It's first level to practice. He's not saying go and be loving and kind and compassionate. That's the compassion wing. You just got to stop being harmful first. Control your crazy body and speech. Harness your crazy verbal energy, your physical energy. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. And that'll produce incredible experiences for you. So the 4 results will be this. Just in terms of killing, you'll wake up next life in a human body. 2, you'll wake up in that life with not a thought to kill. Look at the planet. Most humans kill something. Forget the animals. Most humans kill something. And tragically, with respect, most religions say it's okay to kill in certain circumstances. God, I was taught as a Catholic that God made the creatures for our benefit. With respect. So you wake up with no thought to kill. Can you imagine that? 3, experience similar to the cause of not killing is, guess what? You won't get killed, baby. You'll live to a ripe old age and you won't die young. So you won't get killed and you won't die young. So far, we've got that one in our petrol tank. Enough still petrol in the petrol tank from non-killing. How incredible. How come we haven't got COVID-19 right now? It's because of our past non-killing. Not just because you're lucky. Maybe you even kissed somebody with COVID-19. You didn't get it because you haven't got the karma of killing. So all the people experiencing the COVID-19 and dying young now and getting sick, that's the fruit of, no, dying young and being killed. That's the fruit of killing. Experience similar to the cause. The 4th one, in terms of non-killing, the environmental result of non-killing, is that the physical world itself, the water, the food, the medicine, the physical world itself will nourish you and not harm you. Look at the people who living in garbage environments now with food and medicine. Even other human beings now are the environment for us. You can't even touch other human beings now. You might die. That's the environmental karma of past killing. So the environmental karma of non-killing is you don't get sick. The physical world nourishes you, doesn't harm you. This is very fascinating. And every single action has any of these 4 results. So the main cause of why you're healthy is not the food, is your past non-killing. The main cause of why the physical world is nourishing for you is not because you're just good luck. It's because you're past non-killing. The main reason you're not dead yet is because you're past non-killing. The main reason you don't have a tendency to kill is because you're past non-killing. The main reason you have a human body is you're past non-killing. We are the boss. We create ourselves. Do you want a break a second? Brain or not?
Maybe we have a short break and I'll see some questions come through.
Yeah, good idea. So I'll give you 5. I'll be back again. Same as I'll be back at 15:15 in 6 minutes or something.
That's plenty of time.
Okay, people, have a breather. Go to have a pee or something. Pee caca break, as Mama Zopa would say 40 years ago. Thank you. All right, back again. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, we
Ray?
do. What are the repercussions of the idea of karma for political activism and fighting for justice and reform, e.g. all the people behind the Me Too movement who had experienced violence? Should all those women simply accept that they deserve the violence they've received at the hands of powerful men? It goes on to say, just to follow my question, the Me Too movement, hasn't some good come out of all this activism?
Okay, so what's fascinating about that question, and it's how we all think. It's fascinating that we should even, this is the border point. It's fascinating that we should even ask the question that just because and that's why we find karma so hard, we have this assumption, you see, that if we caused it, and your question is saying this, that therefore you deserve it and you should put up with it. That's the heaviest assumption, and we all have that. That's why we find karma so heavy. In other words, for us, the only basis for having compassion for people or for doing political action is if it's as if we don't deserve it. So because we deserve it, according to our view, interpreting karma, we think we should put up with it. But that's absurd. This is absurd. It's like saying, it's as if you didn't know botany. It's as if you didn't know botany and you've got a garden and it's got weeds in it and it's got veggies in it, but you never know why. You think someone else put it there. You don't know what caused these veggies. In other words, you've forgotten, you've lost your memory, let's say, and you've forgotten that you planted those things. You didn't remember that. So you naturally have the view that what's in the garden, it's not my fault. I didn't put the weeds there, so how dare weeds be there? But suddenly you hear about botany, and then what you're saying is, well, just now I've discovered that I planted the weeds. Should I just sit down and accept the weeds? That's what you're asking. It's wrong question, but we all think of it this way, So, I mean, that's what's absurd about that question. Just because we created it is no logical reason to think you should accept it. It's bizarre. It's completely bizarre to think this, but that's all what we do. So the right answer is, that's what practice is. That's what the point of practice is. When you've learned botany and you now realize that you planted those weeds, you're so shocked because you can't remember. You really thought someone else put them there. Therefore, you felt like an innocent victim. And therefore, you think you're right in political action. How dare someone put weeds in my garden? Because the weeds are there. They're horrible things. It is true that people are harming those women. They have been abused by powerful men or even not powerful men. People have been abused by men, yes, but we assume we're innocent victims. We assume we don't deserve it. And then as soon as we hear that we think we deserve it, as you put, we think, oh, well, I've got to put up with it. That's nihilism. When you've discovered that botany is what made the weeds that you didn't know, you forgot. When we discover the law of botany, that you put the weeds there or you didn't pull them out, then you suddenly realize, oh my God, I better pull them out right now. That's the point. That's why those Tibetans, if you heard me before, those Tibetans, know why they're suffering now. But they demonstrated, I told you that, they demonstrated. They weren't sitting back going, oh, well, you better punish me, I deserve it. That's insanity. But they accept that due to past karma, could have been 1,000 lifetimes ago, they must have harmed the Chinese communists. It's like 1,000 lifetimes ago. And equally, the person who understands that the suffering they have is the fruit of their past action. The person who has happiness knows that they caused that as well. And how do you respond to that? You go, I better plant more. So when you know botany, you know the weeds are there because you planted them. So you pull them out. And now you know what to do because you don't want more weeds. And you know that the veggies are there because you planted them. You deserve those as well. So you grow more veggies. That's the point about practice. That's the logic. So it takes time. Your question is perfect because it shows exactly the way we misunderstand the view of karma. And it takes a while to hear it. And I hope that helped you hear it. So work as hard as possible to try and change the world. And that's why when Jigdrol, he'd been demonstrating in Tibet, he got arrested, but he wasn't angry. That's the point. And that's a hard one to hear. Because the second we hear that if I've been abused by somebody in the past, by a man, let's say, if I've been raped and I've been raped, if I think, oh, well, I must have raped him in the past, we are devastated by that thought because we have to believe that we're innocent. Ego can't cope with thinking that we did something. We have to think it's not fair. That's the logic of our materialist world. That's why we rant and rave and get so angry. But if we have the view of karma, you'll absolutely demonstrate, but you know why it's happening. And like those Tibetan people, they have compassion for their torturers. This is a really hard one for us to hear, because we feel that you have to be angry. How dare that man do that to those women? It is true what they did. It is absolutely, you read the Weinstein stories, you read whatever it is, they're all true. But karma is the explanation for all of it. So it really takes time. And what we don't realize is how deeply entrenched our particular philosophical views, which are the materialist views of innocent victims, completely governs the way we see all this stuff. It takes a while to really process it. So if you have more questions for me as a result of that, I'm really happy to hear them. I hope it made sense. It takes a while to hear it, think it through. Are there any more there?
Only one. Could you please repeat the quote from your mum about virtue?
Who?
Something your mum mentioned to you when you were younger.
Virtue has its own rewards.
Thank you.
So it brings its own results, and that's the real one about accountability. It brings its own results. What you do, that's the same with playing the piano, or the same with cooking. You don't need your cook teacher to be in front of you to see that you did the right recipe and to praise you to make the cake work. That's how we think of punishment and reward. And that's why we, like yesterday talking, we crave the reward. We might make a beautiful cake, but we have to have someone tell us it's a good job. We're not happy with the simple fact that we made a good cake. We need someone to say to us, oh, wow, Robina, you made a good cake. That's attachment to the craving we need to be approved of. So the virtue, goodness, brings its own result, which is your happiness. And that's when we learn to be satisfied with that. Very powerful. There was another question that popped up. What was it?
That's all the questions.
No, I saw another one just write something just there.
Someone said thank you.
Oh, that's all. Oh, and thank you. Yeah, thank you. So no more questions. What about the person who asked about the Me Too business? I want to know if that made sense to that person.
I haven't got a response yet.
Okay.
That's me.
Where are you? Where's me?
Yeah, Anne.
Oh, there you go, Anne. How did the answer sound? Did you get it all?
I'm not entirely, thank you very, very much. I'm still not entirely clear. There's obviously a kind of contradiction. There's a warp and a whiff here, isn't there?
No, it's thick with, I said it all so quickly, but it really takes time to think it all through because there's so many implications of it, Anne. It's so complicated for us. It's because our views at the moment are very different. That's why it's hard to hear the karmic one, because the views we have at the moment. In other words, I think it's, if you see me, if someone sees you and I fighting and they walk into the room, 1 minute before you punch me in the nose really bad, but all they see is me punch you in the nose, and they'll get mad at me, won't they? Because how dare you hurt Anne? But then I will say, but you didn't see Anne punch me just a minute before. So that person will go, oh, well, you deserve it, Anne, so may you suffer. That's how we think of things now. We think if we deserve it, and we have that view very heavy in our culture. Like in other words, if a person harms somebody else and they get harmed back, we are happy. We want to see them suffer. That's behind, I can see it in the prison system in this country. If you've harmed somebody, you deserve to suffer. That's the view in our mind, very deep. That's why we have to have innocent victims. We have no space for not an innocent victim. And as soon as we hear you're not innocent, meaning you created the cause for it, we then think, oh, well, you deserve it. And that's why it's so heavy. That's the view we have. You hear what I'm saying, Anne? But the Buddha's saying every single one of us, whether we're the harmer or being harmed, why I'm the harmer in this life, why I'm that arrogant motherfucking male, excuse me, I shouldn't swear, I know that, but never mind, I just did. Because, if I'm that heavy duty person with power and arrogance and misusing a person, and I abuse a person who might be a woman, then, there's no space in our universe. There's not an atom of space for anybody to have even a millisecond of understanding why Weinstein does it. We want to be angry. We want to hate him. We want to think he's a monster. And the more we think he's a monster, the more he deserves everything he gets. This is the view in our culture. It's impossible for us to hear the Buddha's view, which is so profoundly different, because we think of compassion only for innocent victims. And as soon as you're not innocent, then you're going to suffer in hell, baby. And the more you suffer, the happier I am. In other words, it's based on incredible anger, our view. Now, if you hear the Buddha's view, that's why those young Tibetan nuns, they have the view of karma, that every sentient being Either they're the victim in this case, they know logically, because they've had countless past lives, and that's real for them. They've been a harmer in the past. Otherwise, it's not possible that this fruit of them being harmed could possibly ripen, and if they hadn't sown the seed. So they know that their experiences of being harmed, but also their experiences that are good are all the fruit of their actions. It's a very dynamic view. Whereas we think good things happen, it's just good luck, and bad things happen, it's bad luck. We don't think there's any logic to it when it comes to the person who experiences it. But that's the view in Buddhism. Everybody creates the cause to have every moment of happiness they have due to their past virtue, and every moment of suffering due to their past negativity. Everybody's in the same boat.
So what are you suggesting then that, what's your view on the development of the legal system and the criminalizing of this kind of action? Do you think one should just have compassion for Harvey Weinstein and just pat him on the head and send him on his way, or do you think it's legitimate for him to be held accountable, and actually charged and punished for this? Do you think that is too excessive? He shouldn't be punished?
No, you see, that's again the other extreme. Again, I'm going to say it's nihilistic view that you just expressed, which is totally common. When we say you have compassion for somebody, we only have room for a person who is innocent. Then they deserve my compassion. Think about my meaning. The moment that person who saw me punch you, but didn't see you punch me before, heard that you punched me before, they will stop having compassion for you. Well, now we'll say, now you deserve it. That's how we think, isn't it? So Weinstein deserves now what he gets. But the Buddhist analysis is this. Weinstein in the past was probably a female who got raped, who got harmed, and who had masses of anger, and now due to some other karma is born. And if you think, is born as this big, tall, loud, arrogant, angry dude. And due to the karma between men and women, women see men as 10 times more powerful than they are. But if you listen to Weinstein, he is like a pathetic child. But what we see is a monster. That's due to his karma to be seen as powerful even. I remember one time, one woman, she was on 60 Minutes, and it was very fascinating. An Australian actor had the same experience like so many women. But what was fascinating, and this blew my mind, was this. He tried to jump on top of her in the hotel. She got out of the way. She went into the toilet and locked the door. And then suddenly she said she found herself, surprisingly to herself, shouting out, "You naughty boy, put your clothes on," like his mum. And then there was silence. And she went out, and Harvey, poor fat, pock-marked faced, ugly Harvey, and even apparently his penis is ugly. People say these terrible things about the poor man. You can only imagine his self-loathing. He is sitting on the bed, looking pathetic in his dressing gown, like a child, saying, "Oh, you don't like me because I'm fat." Now, analyze that kind of personality. That's a pathetic, self-loathing, self-disgusted, uncontrolled, sad human being. Now, you just threw the baby out with the bathwater because you're suggesting now that when you see that, we go, "Oh, poor Harvey, pat him on the head." No, he must be accountable. And we have laws in the country. We have laws. But if we had it properly done, we'd all be coming from compassion, but it will be tough love compassion. Because if you break the laws, if you abuse somebody and you get caught, that's the way the universe is, you're going to go to prison. But we have to fit it. We have to see a monster and we have to see a saint. We're so schizophrenic. It's so unrealistic. We're not seeing people's minds at all. Because again, we've got this addiction to having an innocent victim and a monster. And we have no space in our mind to see anything in Harvey Weinstein that is pathetic and sad, which is why he harms other people. Are you kind of hearing my point? So of course there has to be accountability, but it's got to come from a reasonable place and intelligence and proper rules and understanding that we are all in the same boat. It's a very different view. You understand what I'm saying, Anne?
I think so. So you're saying that punishment meted out by the law is still legitimate within your Buddhist framework.
It's the way. Listen. it's just our world. We have these rules. You're living in mummy's household, and there'll be consequences if you don't make your bed. You've got to have rules and laws. We just have that. Some countries have better laws. I mean, all I know is when a friend of mine in Norway wrote to me and was so looking forward to his 2 years in prison, he couldn't wait because it was in a beautiful house in the country where he had education and food and good place and places to walk, and it was all free. He couldn't wait to get to prison. So it's a question of what country you live in and whether it's vindictive and brutal and angry and violent, or whether it's got some semblance of compassion and empathy. It wants to help human beings develop. It depends even, I mean, relatively even. Do you understand?
Yes. Thank you very much.
We have rules and laws between us, but if they're based on compassion and wisdom, then it'll be reasonable rules and people will benefit from being in prison. But we learn to be accountable. It's just the way the world is. But if I look at the prisons in America, and Australia is probably more similar every day, it's just based on complete rage and anger and evil, this fantasy of evil monsters and complete innocent saints. It's just not realistic, you know? So it's very powerful. It's so powerful to hear. I know when I first heard the teachings at Chen Raising Institute back in 1976, and I'd been a radical lesbian separatist feminist, and I was the furthest end of the feminist politics you could imagine. I'd been through 10 years of intense radical lefty politics, black politics, communist politics. I was a hippie. I lived my life demonstrating. I hardly had a job, you know. I was a full-time demonstrator, full-time political activist. And then a radical lesbian separatist feminist. And I came to Chen Raising, and it was 10 years of intense hard work on my part. It was like I'd reverted 10 years ago, all these hippies. I was in a state of culture shock, I can't tell you. But I knew the Dharma was for me. And when I heard about karma, it was the word that blew my mind. I knew that's what I'd been missing all my life. And it was a vast view. I mean, it's taken me years to really internalize it properly and try to live according to it. You know, it's profound what it implies, but it's a complete shift in your mind that occurs. And it helps you give up attachment, give up anger, and you see things in a much different way. I'm not saying you should have the view of karma, but obviously I buy into it. It's the one that I find enormously helpful, because then you have a whole different approach to the whole world. We are all in the same boat. I mean, this is another whole point as well. Like, it's a very powerful point. Have you, when you hear about the mind, you recognize in your mind you've got some anger, some attachment, some jealousy? You recognize those things?
Yes, definitely.
Or in the universe. Okay, good. Now, think in your life, anything you've ever done, even a tiny thing, to harm anybody. Have you ever harmed anybody, ever?
Absolutely.
Good.
I have to admit.
Now, it's very clear. When you harmed them, it was not because you were full of love or kindness or generosity or patience or forgiveness, was it? No. It was because you were hurt and angry and resentful and jealous or depressed. Do you agree?
Yes.
So Harvey is just 10 times more that. So anything you've done to harm others is because of your attachment, because of your anger, but we don't like to take that responsibility. We want to blame the other person. It's too hard for us. And this is the irony of ego in Buddhism. It's terrifying to feel that, yes, I'm responsible, because then we want to kill ourselves because we're so extreme. But we can realize that that's why anybody harms anybody is because of attachment and anger and past karmic imprints. So, you know, I've got a friend on death row in Kentucky. He's a Buddhist. He's an amazing guy. And there's one fellow who comes to the classes when I go, and I know him. And my friend Mitchell said to me, Robina, he thinks of torture all the time. So because of karma, that's why karmic view is so powerful. We don't know why you get a person who tortures. We see a pedophile, we just think they're doing it on purpose and they're evil and they should be put to hell. We think an evil wine son, we only want to see he's evil and manipulative. We don't have any recognition. Due to karma, he's born with these tendencies. Due to his past actions, he's born with these tendencies, and you're like a lemming, he's just following his tendencies. Look how we can't even control eating a bloody piece of chocolate cake. Can you imagine being born due to past karma with a tendency to want to jump on little girls all day? Or for Harvey, or like this latest one, Epstein, the one guy who killed himself, who's, you know, he had to have sex 20 times a day. Can you imagine the mind unceasingly all day thinking about having, you know, having sex with somebody because your mind's obsessed? That's the view of karma. We come into this world with these driven by our habits. We've got the pathetic habit to eat too much cake. And look how hard it is to say no to cake.
Yeah.
So when you understand the view of karma, that we don't come as innocent victims. We don't come as a result of our mother's actions. We bring our own stuff with us. And then look at the tendencies of some people, and you can see the nightmare they must be living in. So then you can only have compassion. But my friend on death row, don't let him torture. I'm sorry, I'm not happy he's on death row, but I'm happy he's being protected from torturing people.
Yes, if I can just say one more thing, I have no difficulty whatsoever feeling compassion for Harvey Weinstein.
Okay.
You know, he looks like a pathetic old man.
Right.
He's
Exactly.
obviously,
Yeah.
you know, destroyed. I have no difficulty feeling compassion for him.
Okay.
But I'm glad that this situation has arisen and come to the courts, and that he has lost, and that women formed solidarity and fought so
That's
hard
right.
for so many years for this
Yes.
to come to court and to be successful.
That's right.
In that way, we can protect other people, whether they're men or women or whatever, doing
right.
the same sort of thing.
Exactly.
That there is a legal recourse. So
that's why the Tibetans are demonstrating. That's exactly the same reason.
Yeah.
They're not sitting back just saying, oh, well, they're trying to get their country back. But the difference is, Anne, if it's coming from anger and rage and vindictiveness, and being glad that Harvey will suffer, then we are destroying ourselves.
Yes.
That's why the Dalai Lama doesn't have anger.
Yes,
That's
I totally agree. Yes.
If it can be done within the framework of wanting to help people, and done from compassion and courage. All those Tibetans were demonstrating, but they are not angry because they have the view of karma, but they know it's the right thing to do. So it's it needs a lot of thinking through to tie all the knots, you know, to untie all the knots and join the dots in this thinking. It's very complex, but it's logical if we unpack it.
Thank you so much.
Good, Anne. Thank you. It's a really important conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Venerable, there's a lot of people saying that it's a great discussion.
Good.
I wonder, we're able to have this discussion because we're discussing Buddhist philosophy, and this has arisen out of that. How do we approach a discussion like this with someone that doesn't have this foundation? No, you can't. Okay.
You can't. I mean, you don't shove karma down people's throats. But you know what?
There's a delicate way.
Pardon?
Is there a delicate way?
Yeah, it's not even delicate. There's a very logical way. You know, this is the thing about what I said when I said to Anne, remember the times you've harmed people. Was it because of love and compassion and kindness? Of course not. It's because you're angry, hurt, resentful, upset, and the ego smashing, you know? So if we can have the courage, and this is Buddha's first point, forget even about future lives. This is the point. Forget about future lives. But if we can have enough courage this is the first level of practice, the junior school and high school. The Buddha's whole approach is to become first, control ourselves not to harm others, because we have to try and see if I'm driven by anger, if I'm driven by attachment, forget karmic consequences in the future reign. But right now, look at the pain it causes me. Look at the distress in my mind, and look forget in this life how I developed the habit to keep killing, the habit to keep lying, the habit to keep eating too much cake, the habit to keep doing those horrible things. I've got to first recognize, forget the compassion for the people I'm harming. I have got to see how I'm harming myself right now. Anybody can think that. That's got nothing to do with belief or karma or religion and karma, in the simplest sense, but not long-term karma, and got nothing to do with punish and reward. But we never do that. We always act arrogant. We point our fingers to everybody else. We think, we never look into our own mind, and we just want to judge other people. That's our problem. It's our own misunderstanding. If we can really know our own minds, then we will see how we harm ourselves by our own anger, our own depression, our own killing, our own stealing. That's logical. So, but we're so full of vindictiveness. And if I have been raped and I'm angry, I never think, I'm so convinced my anger is because of Harvey. That's the big problem. It's hard for me to see that my anger is mine. And that's the part that's difficult. But if we can see that, we can really make a shift. Are you with me? Yeah. That's logic, but it's very hard to see it because we love to blame. Anger is just called blame, and we never see the harm it does to us. In fact, our view is, I'm allowed to be angry. Look at what Harvey did to me. That's the part that's difficult, and it's hard to get past that part in our culture. You understand? I mean, my friend Sunny, the one who was on death row, was 12 years and in prison for 17 years for killing 2 policemen. Her husband was even executed. And even she went to the execution and his head burst into flames. I mean, can you imagine the nightmare, the suffering? She's not Buddhist. She has some idea of the universe and doesn't talk about karma much, doesn't have a view of a creator. But she was able to work on her mind so clearly in prison. For me, really, she's a powerful example. This outrageous injustice of being accused of murder She never did a single thing wrong. But and many people go completely mad in that environment. She was able to realize that she had a choice to change herself because she knew that the way she was produced the person she became. That's the point I'm making. And she doesn't talk about reincarnation. She doesn't talk about karma like that. She doesn't talk at all. She could see that she was causing her own suffering. And even though it was unbelievably unjust, she knew she had the choice to change herself. So she came out of prison a wiser, happier, more marvelous person, not tortured with no, what do we call it? Post-stress syndrome, all those things, because she didn't suppress anything. She worked on her mind. She is a perfect example of this is one anybody can see, but it takes courage to hear this because we want to blame. We want to be innocent victims. This is the irony, It's very powerful. What else, people? Questions?
No more questions currently.
15 minutes to go. Time goes so quickly. It's an intense one. And many people, Buddhists, don't like to talk about it. I think it's really powerful. I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's so important. It really makes us think, really makes us analyze and look into ourselves. And that's why the karmic one is not just future lives and past lives. It's every second, whatever we think and do produces the person we become. And this anyone with half a brain can prove if we're brave enough, if we're aware enough. I mean, one of my sisters who has not the slightest interest in any kind of religion. We're all brought up Catholics, but she has no interest, not the slightest interest in anything, Buddhism, religion, anything. No, it never occurs to her mind. But she has a powerful sense of virtue and ethics and knows that what's the benefit to her of being angry and resentful. So she's an incredible person. I really admire her because she understands that. So that's the point I'm making, mate. You don't have to worry about it. That's why Dalai Lama talks about secular ethics. It's so logical to everybody that we produce the person we become. But this already demands so much accountability, so much awareness. And this, anybody can understand this one. You don't have to worry about whether, I don't care if your mind's in your toenail. You don't have to worry about that talk. This we can see. And that's really, any good therapist in this culture will talk like that. That's the modern therapy, how we talk. And that's brilliant. It's already fantastic. And that's cause and effect. We produce ourselves. It's so clear. That is inarguable. So forget the long-term one, just the long-term one is, full-fledged Buddhists and people who want to talk about it can. Some people like it. But like Anne's point, we've got to think it through, that all the different implications of it. We've got a lot of misconceptions. You understand?
I had a question. Is it okay if I ask a question, please?
Yeah, who is it? Where are you? Oh, Catherine.
My name's Kitty.
Kitty,
yes, I started studying with you back in 2002 when you did a little workshop in Balmain, and I used to go to the Institute every week because I lived in Newtown, so I loved it, but I moved to the country.
Talk to me, Kitty.
So my question is, when you were speaking about experience similar to the cause,
yes.
and I imagined a person who, say, is very ill, if they are able to overcome their illness, so my husband cured himself of a terminal disease, was that through the cause of our current action, or was that because he was always going to because of his past actions?
No, it's both. It's both, Kitty. In the same way that you know very well, if there's a weed in if there's some bad, let's say there's some seeds in your garden that are really bad seeds, but then you've got the present conditions called the lousy weather, the wrong direction, not enough sun. So if you change the conditions, the seeds can then begin to shift and they can ripen as lovely flowers. It's the same with your husband. So maybe the seeds weren't so bad. So the seeds that, the seed wasn't growing as a nice flower in the garden. The seed was sort of okay, but the conditions were terrible. So that's why it didn't grow nicely. So you change the conditions. So the same with your husband. One, he had the karma to suffer with the sickness, which is due to past harming, but he had other seeds that were also there due to not harming, but by working on conditions now, he was able to, by working on changing the sunshine and making the dirt better, doing good medicine, doing practices now, that was able to nourish his other seed, which was what caused him to be healthy. So it's a very nuanced thing. It's not a question of it's always going to be that way, no, because there's more than one seed involved. So in other words, two people go to the same doctor with the same cancer diagnosis, Each of them, that cancer is the fruit of their past killing, but one will get healed and one won't, because the one that gets healed has also got access to other non-killing karmic seeds, such that the medicine will help them get better. So it's always karma, but its conditions also play a role. It's not absolute. Do you understand me, Kitty?
I do. So does desire ever come into it then? Because the two people who go to the doctor with the same diagnosis, some might think one person gets well, they wanted it more than the other person.
No. Okay. The wanting, no, that can be a condition. I mean, you can want a beautiful flower to grow, but if there's no seed there, no matter how much you want it, you've got to have all the conditions there in place. But wanting it sincerely is the motor that makes you do the work. Some people might just give up and not try to nourish the garden. But so wanting it is a very important one. That's the first step in wanting. But the wanting to get better isn't itself what is going to cure you. It just creates the cause for you to do the things that will cure you.
Got it.
That's my point.
So it's like the motivation.
Yeah, motivation, precisely, darling. In other words, if there's a good seed in your garden and you've got really strong seeds from your past gardening, and the weather is beautiful and the soil is perfect, you have to do hardly any work. You could sleep all day and be really lazy. Those seeds will still grow. You understand? So the karma, it becomes really strong. I mean, even with, like an accident. I remember this one young Tibetan nun I met when I was in hospital in Kathmandu one year, had to have a little operation. And the woman in the next room, a nun, my friend introduced me to her. It's like an incredible story. She was in a helicopter with 5 other people, in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the winter in Nepal, in the mountains, and the helicopter crashed. Everybody was smashed to smithereens. She fell into a tree, and from the tree, she fell onto the ground. Every bone in her body was broken. She said, I looked up and I saw her skirt in the tree. She reached her hand out, and there was her phone intact, with a line and with a battery, and she picked it up and rang her father, and it took them 10 hours to find her. But that's like what's called a miracle, but it's not a miracle. She had such non-killing karma, no killing karma whatsoever. Even though she got shattered, she didn't die because the karma wasn't there. Like a miracle. The phone was just in hand's breadth, right next to her hand, with a battery and with a line, intact. Ring it up and her father answers the phone and they find her. It still took them 10 hours. Every bone in her body was broken, like a miracle. They didn't even find the remains of the others. So that's because of incredibly powerful virtuous karma. It's not a miracle. It's everything is due to karma. There can't be a fruit that doesn't have a seed. There can't, and if a seed is there, it will ripen. So that's why we've got to purify the negative seeds and grow the good ones, It's very logical, but it's hard for us to hear that, to get used to that. But go on. What?
So that gives people encouragement for the now, because if people were to think it was all past, then they wouldn't be as motivated to sow the seeds now. But because you're saying it's a combination of the two, you're motivated then to sow them for tomorrow.
See, that's the point about if you look in your garden and you don't know botany, or you don't remember that you grew the weeds and you don't remember that you grew the veggies, then you'll hate the weeds and think, how dare there be weeds in my garden, feeling all innocent. How dare someone put weeds in my garden? I mean, this is ridiculous. And then you'd go, oh, aren't I lucky? Look at all these veggies, and you greedily eat them all up. But if you know that you planted them, you'll pull out the weeds and you'll grow more veggies. Every time you eat a veggie, you'll grow another veggie. That's what the practice is. When you know that whatever ripens is a fruit of your negative karma and your virtuous karma, you're sick of the negative karma, so you pull out you stop, first of all, you first stop sowing more negative weeds, and then you do the purification, which is pulling out the other ones, and you want to grow more flowers. It's logical, and there's a real sense of enthusiasm and optimism because you're in charge. It's not being done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thank you, Robina.
Good darling, thanks. What else?
Robina.
Who's that?
Robina, hi, it's Deb here.
Hello, Deb. Hello, darling. Talk to me.
Good, thank you. Could you talk more about purifying the harmful seeds?
I will do that, yeah. We've got 10 minutes. We can do that. Okay, so the very first level of practice, entry level, junior school, grade 1, Buddha says, hey, guys, stop sowing more poison seeds. That's why the first most urgent one right now, try not to kill, steal, lie, harm. Calm your body down, calm your speech down, control them, and stop sowing more negative seeds. It's really logical. But obviously, we've got billions of seeds we've already planted in the past. So we want to start putting atomic bombs under them before they ripen. That's the next level of practice. That's purification. So there's no karma we can't purify. There's no seed we can't pull out. If it ripens, it's obviously you can't pull it. You've got to pull out the tree. You know, like the cancer has ripened, you can still try to fix it. But we've got to pull them out before they ripen. And that's purification. That's the 4 opponent powers. As Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do this practice every day. Because when we understand karma really well and understand the delusions, we'll know that every second of the day, we're planting negative seeds like crazy. I mean, don't be guilty about this. It's just the way we are, because we've all got attachment and aversion. We're not, you know, we haven't realized emptiness yet. So we just got to get ahead of the game, do a bit of weeding every night. It's logical. So by controlling your body, speech, and mind every day, then you do your weeding at the end of the day. Then you can go to bed with a happy mind, Lama Yeshe says. So there's no karmic seed we have planted that hasn't yet ripened that we can't get under control. So the 4 steps are really straightforward, you know. The 4 R's. I think all of this is in these course notes that you've got in those PDFs I sent. All there. All of this is there, okay? So the first one, the 4 are called regret. The second is reliance. The third is the remedy. And the 4th is resolve. It's a good way to remember them. Regret, reliance, remedy, resolve. Okay. So let's talk in different order, but this is a nice order. And the analogy the Lamas always use is the analogy of seeds, is poison. You've just eaten poison. Now we know that poison will harm you and cause you to be very sick. And we don't want to be sick. So it's a really simple analogy. Every time we do a negative action, every time we follow attachment and follow anger and follow jealousy and whatever, do dumb actions, that, especially the ones that harm others, then we're poisoning. That's like eating poison. You're harming yourself. Every time you eat that sugar, you know it's going to ripen as diabetes. You don't want it. So it's got to come from an attitude. This regret is like a sense of not guilt. It's a self-respect. Like you don't get guilty if you eat sugar. Oh, I'm so bad, I ate sugar. That's useless. There's no action involved. But if you go, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I can't believe I just ate some sugar. Quick, what will I do about it? There's action involved. And that's like self-respect. Regret is self-respect, not guilt. But we're a bit addicted to guilt, I'm afraid. So anyway, what do you regret? Well, you do the action, you do your practice at the end of the day, and you keep it very simple. You can think, well, whatever I did today, I badmouthed my husband, I kicked the dog, I screamed at the driver. Okay, if you killed your mother as well, whatever it is, whatever you did with your body and speech that's dumb, that's driven by your ridiculous delusions, you acknowledge them. You go, what an idiot. I did this, I did that, I did this, I said that. I regret this, you say to yourself, and you've got to say why. Otherwise, it feels like guilt. And what's guilt? Oh, I did this and I'm a bad person. We rush to that very quickly. We've got to counteract that. It's got to say, I did do this, but I regret that because I've just sown a dumb seed in my ridiculous mind. I don't want the future suffering. So what can I do about it? It's more proactive. It's more kind to yourself. So you can regret the things you've done today. You've got vows and things. You regret your broken vows. And then you can say to yourself, if you have confidence in past lives, and whatever I've done in a past life since beginningless time, with my body, with my speech, to harm sentient beings, I regret these because I don't want the future suffering. Regret doesn't mean I shouldn't have done it. Think about that. That's when your mummy gets mad at you. You shouldn't have done that. That's called anger. That is totally useless. Saying I did this, I'm a bad person, that's called guilt. That is totally useless. Saying I shouldn't have done it is useless. It's recognizing I did eat that sugar. Oh my gosh, it will have consequences. So of course I regret it. And then the regret says, then what can I do about it? It's a very different view. So you think of whatever you regret, and it's compassion for yourself. Then you think the second step, well, whom can I turn to? Whom can I rely upon? Where's my doctor? So here Buddha is our doctor. And this is the big difference between the relationship between Jesus and God and the Buddha. If I've got confidence in God, then I will regret that I did something, a sin, but then I have to, the second step is, whom can I rely upon? I have to rely upon God, and I have to beg God to forgive me, because forgiveness is what purifies me. That is not the Buddha. Buddha is a very kind person. He would forgive you. That's like the doctor. Of course she'd forgive you. What good is that? Forgiving you for eating sugar will not cure your diabetes. You have to take the medicine. That's the Buddhist approach. So it's a very different view. So we rely upon the Buddha, not as our creator, no such thing, but as our doctor, whose medicine I want to use. I do the healing. She gives me the advice. I take the medicine. So we are the ones who heal ourselves, but we rely upon the Buddha as our doctor. So in the second step in a meditation, you visualize the Buddha above your head, whatever, and you remember how marvelous it is to have a decent doctor. You can take refuge, whatever. The second part under this second heading called reliance is now where you also have compassion for those you've harmed. First is you have compassion for yourself. Now you have compassion for those you harmed. You regret for their sake, for the people you've harmed, lied to, stolen from, cheated, whatever it is. I regret for their sake. I must purify for their sake. And if you're brave enough, you'll also have compassion for those who've harmed you. If you've been raped, harmed, abused by your parents, your next door neighbor, your husband, whatever. We've all had someone harm us. If we're brave enough on the basis of understanding karma, that they will suffer in the future for their action, that's the basis of your compassion for them. If you can do it. If you're not ready for it, you don't go there. It's up to you. Third one is you take the medicine or you apply the antidote. Well, you know, in your daily life, what the opposite is, if you're regretting lying, the opposite in your daily life is try and tell the truth. If you're regretting stealing, the opposite is to give things. So they're the obvious things you would do to counteract. But this particular practice of visualizing the Buddha, all the Tibetan Lamas praise it. This Buddha is called Vajrasattva from the Bodhisattva path. And it's a very powerful practice that all the Lamas say. So this third step, which is called the remedy, is basically the visualization of the Buddha and the recitation of his mantra. It's all in the book. And you would then do that, visualizing, you know, and visualizing the purification, reciting the Sanskrit mantra. And the point to realize, understand here is that that's what purifies your mind. As Lama Yeshe says, it's our mind that creates negativity. So it's our mind that purifies with positivity. So the strength of your mind and the strength of your regret, the strength of your compassion and refuge, and the strength of this imagining purifying, that's what purifies. Your mind is what purifies. There's no other magic necessary. It's the strength of your mind. So you'd visualize and say the mantra, and all the Lamas really praise the Sanskrit mantras as being super powerful. This sound really purifies your body and your mind. And then the fourth step is, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, is the most important. The resolve, the determination not to do it again. You make decisions. You give yourself a timeline. And then you digging that in your mind, that grew. If every day you vow not to kill, because you've got your vow not to kill, and you reiterate that vow, I will never kill. It's not just going in one ear and out the other. It's the strength of your mind that drives that deeper and deeper as a habit in your mind. And so guess what? You'll watch yourself like a hawk and you won't kill. That's how you change your mind. So it's a huge practice psychologically. And it's like being your own friend. Don't think of it as religion. There's a way of doing it with all your bells and everything. Just do it as a simple psychological process, talking to yourself, going through these 4 steps. It's super powerful. And then, as Lama Yeshe said, you go to bed with a happy mind. That's it. Noon.
4 hours and 10 minutes.
That's it. Okay, people. I'll leave you with this. Stuff to think about. Thank you, Kitty. Thank you, everybody. And just keep applying every day to the best of our ability, the views of karma, the view of the mind, whatever, to the degree that it makes sense for us. And no, it's a process, you know, like everything. And Tibetans have a lovely way of saying practice makes perfect. It's nicer. They say nothing gets more difficult with practice. It's a lovely way, more humble way of putting it. Nothing gets more difficult with practice. So remember that, okay? Jangchub, Semcho, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchi. That's the second prayer. May the precious supreme bodhicitta, not yet born, arise, and may that arisen not decline but increase more and more. And go back to the previous one, the first one, the second one, yeah, the first one, yeah. So due to this virtue of listening to these teachings, may I quickly become a Buddha and lead every single sentient being without exception to that state. How amazing. What a wonderful thought, okay? And may all our lamas live long, because we need them badly on this planet. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Much
Madam.
love.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Robina.
much.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye. See you tomorrow. All being well. Bye,
Thank you.
sweetheart.
Thank you.
Oh, it's not Saturday. What day is it? Friday or Saturday?
It's
Oh,
Friday.
it's Fri- oh, yeah, we're Thursday. Okay, you're Friday. That's right, I forgot. Okay, darlings. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Any questions, just email me. Otherwise, I'll see you same time in the morning.
Thank you, Rain.
Pleasure. See you.
Bye-bye.